I was Carter Rhodes, husband, engineer, and eternal optimist. The kind of guy who believed that good people, given enough time and understanding, would always choose love. I wasn't naive, at least, I didn't think so. I just believed in the life I'd built, in the woman I built it with. For 3 years, Ivy and I lived what I thought was the dream. Small but cozy townhouse with a garden she never had time to tend. Coffee in mismatched mugs every Sunday. Plans scribbled in notebooks. Where we'd travel, what our babies' names would be, how we'd grow old without ever forgetting how to laugh. She was magnetic, sharp-witted, warm-eyed. The kind of woman who made everyone in the room lean a little closer just to catch her next sentence. And I never once thought I was beneath her. I thought we were a team. I was the anchor, steady and methodical. She was the flame, quick with ideas, a touch unpredictable, always on the edge of something exciting. It worked. At least, it used to. I was deep into a project at work, software for medical logistics, and I'd just finished debugging a complicated segment when I realized something. I couldn't remember the last time Ivy and I had sat and talked without one of us glancing at a clock. It hit me hard, like the moment you wake from a good dream and know you won't be able to fall back in. Still, I brushed it off. Life got busy, right? People change with their schedules. It wasn't a red flag, just a yellow one. A soft caution. She'd come home tired but smiling, usually with a story, something absurd her boss, Sterling Voss, had said in a board meeting, or how the new intern couldn't figure out the copier. I used to live for those stories. They made me feel like part of her world, even if I didn't wear suits or sit in skyscrapers. But over time, those stories stopped coming. Gradually, like a faucet that didn't just shut off, but trickled to a stop. Then the late night started. At first, once a week. Then twice. Then 3. I told myself she was just proving herself. Sterling was known in the industry as brilliant but ruthless, and Ivy was ambitious. I didn't want to get in her way. But there were other things, smaller things, that started piling up like snowflakes on a roof you weren't watching. She started cooking less. I started eating alone more. She'd scroll through her phone with her back turned, her face unreadable in the screen's glow. She stopped wearing the lavender lotion I loved. I only noticed because she'd started wearing something else, sharper, muskier, and always on Fridays. I asked her about it one evening. Nothing confrontational, just a simple, busy week. She smiled, thin and tired. Sterling's got us working on this merger deal. Lots of moving parts. I nodded, pretending that answer settled something. But it didn't. I'd worked tight deadlines before. I knew stress. Stress didn't look like that. Stress didn't look like forgetting our Wednesday pizza nights or canceling our weekend hike because of a work call. Stress didn't feel like distance wrapped in politeness. Like being around someone who still hugged you out of habit, not warmth. I told myself it was just a phase. That all couples hit dry spells, and we just needed a vacation. I even suggested a weekend away, just us, no phones. She said maybe, but we never picked a date. One evening, I came home early, earlier than usual. I wanted to surprise her. Maybe cook dinner, light some candles, remind us both what this marriage was built on. The house was quiet. She wasn't home. I called. No answer. A few minutes later, a text, still at work. Don't wait up. That was it. No heart emoji. No apology. Just a flat update. I stood there, staring at that message, wondering when Ivy had started talking to me like a colleague. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her side of the bed cold for hours before she finally came home, slipped in without turning on the light, and whispered, "Sorry. Long day." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure what I'd say if I did. That was the first time I realized I didn't know how long I'd been lying to myself. That maybe the calm I thought I was in wasn't calm at all. It was quiet erosion, a slow, undetectable shift until everything you believed in was just slightly off-center. But still, I told myself, this is marriage. It's not all fire and poetry. Sometimes it's showing up, even when things feel off. Sometimes it's holding on until the storm passes. The problem was, I didn't know the storm had already started. And I was the last to see the clouds. The night of the gala was when the shape of my doubts finally took form. I remember the invitation sitting on the counter, printed on black cardstock with gold foil, Voss International's annual winter benefit. Formal attire required. Ivy was buzzing about it for days, though I couldn't tell if it was excitement or nerves. "It's important I show up," she said as she adjusted her earrings in the mirror. "Everyone's going to be there." She didn't ask if I wanted to come. She told me I should. I wore my best suit, the dark navy one she always said made my shoulders look strong. But that night, she didn't mention it. She was already halfway out the door by the time I grabbed the keys. The venue was lavish. Chandeliers so large they could crush a car, music soft and expensive sounding, and servers moving with practiced invisibility. Ivy slipped into the crowd like water finding its level. I trailed behind her, trying to keep up with the rhythm of her professional world. That's when I saw him as Sterling Voss. He was exactly the kind of man you didn't want to dislike because it would be so easy to. Tall, groomed like a politician, with the kind of jawline that belonged on a campaign poster. He didn't smile. He smirked. He didn't laugh. He measured reactions. And when he looked at people, it wasn't at them. It was through them, like he was already assigning a value. When he spotted Ivy across the room, his entire posture shifted, his chest lifted, chin raised, eyes suddenly brighter. She smiled back. Not just politely. Warmly. Familiar. I watched as they greeted each other like they were alone in a room full of shadows. Then he turned his gaze to me. "So you're Ivy's husband," he said, like he'd found a stain on his suit. I extended my hand. He took it, but it was limp. No strength, no sincerity. Just a gesture. A thing to get through. His eyes didn't leave mine, though. They flickered with something else. Challenge? Amusement? Dismissal? "Carter Rhodes," I said, offering a smile I didn't feel. Sterling turned his attention back to Ivy. "Your wife is indispensable, you know. I don't know how we survived without her." Ivy laughed. Too hard. Her hand brushed his arm, brief but intimate. I noticed it. So did he. And for the first time in our marriage, I felt like the outsider in my own story. As the night wore on, I watched him, the way he leaned too close, how his eyes lingered on her neck when she looked away, how she didn't pull back when he invaded her space. I told myself I was being dramatic, that it was the setting, the champagne, the professional charisma. But my gut didn't buy it. My gut had already seen what my brain refused to admit. Ivy introduced me to a few of her coworkers, but she never really stayed at my side. I became a prop, an accessory to her polished evening. When I tried to wrap an arm around her waist, she stiffened slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I did. Later, while pretending to enjoy a plate of risotto and lobster, I caught Sterling watching her from across the ballroom. Not watching, studying. His eyes followed her with the quiet hunger of a man used to getting what he wants. A man who doesn't care what he has to ruin to take it. We didn't speak again that night, Sterling and I. But his words stuck. "So you're Ivy's husband." Like he was pointing out an obstacle, not a person. Ivy and I rode home in silence. She scrolled through her phone, smiling occasionally at something on the screen. I asked how the night went. She said it was a success. That she made all the right impressions. I didn't ask who she was texting. I didn't want to hear her lie. When we got home, she headed straight for the shower. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her heels left near the door, shiny, black, new. I'd never seen her wear those before. Just like I hadn't seen the perfume bottle now sitting on her dresser, or the new clutch bag, or the sudden change in how she dressed for casual Fridays. There's a kind of fear that doesn't scream. It doesn't throw things or demand answers. It whispers. It seeps. It sits with you at night and reminds you that people don't change all at once. They drift. One compromise at a time. One delayed conversation. One unspoken truth. I laid beside her that night, pretending to sleep. Her breathing was even, peaceful. Mine wasn't. My mind kept replaying that smirk, that handshake, that lingering glance. I wanted to believe in Ivy. I needed to. But belief without evidence is just hope. And hope, when it breaks, cuts deeper than truth ever could. Some people think denial is loud. It isn't. It's quiet. It wears a patient smile and pours your coffee just the way you like it. It's in the way you tell yourself she's just tired, that work is draining her, that not every cold night means the marriage is. That's how I lived for weeks after the gala, between the lines, in the spaces Ivy no longer filled with words. She still came home. Still kissed me hello, but it was more of a habit than a greeting. Still cooked dinner some nights, but often left it on the stove with a note, working late in the study. "Don't wait up." I read those notes like coded messages, searching for what they didn't say. She stopped asking how my day was. When I volunteered details, she nodded distractedly, eyes on her phone. Always her phone. I started noticing small changes. Ivy used to leave her device on the counter, face up, unbothered. Now she turned it over the second she set it down. She started using her thumbprint lock again. And whenever it buzzed, she'd glance around before checking it. Not urgently. Carefully. That kind of caution isn't born from nothing. One night, we sat on the couch, 2 feet apart, but a galaxy away. I was half watching a movie. She was pretending to scroll through recipes on her iPad, but I caught her minimizing messages when I leaned too close. I decided to speak, careful and controlled. "Hey," I said, voice low. "Can I ask you something?" She glanced at me. "Of course. What's going on with you lately?" "With us." I expected defensiveness. What I got was deflection. She sighed and looked back at her screen. "I've just been tired, Carter. Work is intense. Sterling's pushing this acquisition deal, and I'm his only point of contact for a lot of the board." "I know, but it's not just work. You barely talk to me anymore. I feel like I'm living with a roommate." She froze, her jaw tightening. "So now I'm a bad wife because I'm trying to excel at my job?" "That's not what I said." She stood and grabbed her water bottle off the table. "You don't get it. Sterling's not easy to work for. He's intense. He expects availability. If I don't respond, I'm out. It's that simple." I watched her shoulders tense, eyes sharp. There was fear beneath her frustration, but also something else. Guilt, maybe, or resentment. "Is he inappropriate with you?" I asked, careful with every syllable. She hesitated, just a flicker. "No. He's demanding, not inappropriate. He flirts with everyone. It's just who he is." "And you flirt back?" She didn't answer. Just walked upstairs. I sat in that silence, listening to her footsteps, the closing of the bedroom door, the hum of our marriage slowly dissolving into static. My heart didn't break that night. It frayed. I stopped trying to pretend after that. Pretending made me feel like an accomplice to my own betrayal. I started paying attention. When Ivy smiled at her texts, I watched how long she lingered on the screen. When she mentioned work, I listened for what she didn't say. Sterling's name crept into our conversations like a ghost, always there, never welcome. Once, I asked her if she wanted to go away for the weekend. Just us. She blinked at me like I'd asked her to move to another planet. "I can't take time off right now," she said. "Sterling needs me focused." I wanted to ask when her job had become her life. But the truth was, I already knew the answer. It wasn't about ambition anymore. It wasn't even about pressure. Something had shifted. A line had been crossed. Maybe emotionally. Maybe more. But something had changed. The night I decided to act wasn't dramatic. There was no big fight, no screaming match. Just a moment, quiet and brutal. I had come downstairs to get water. It was nearly midnight. Ivy was still awake, typing furiously on her laptop in the living room. She didn't hear me at first. I stood behind her, watching the reflection of her screen in the glass door. She was in a chat window. I couldn't see the words, but the name at the top? Sterling Voss. She noticed me then and quickly closed the laptop. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, too casually. "No," I said. "You." "Sterling just sent over some files." "It's nothing." But it didn't look like nothing. It didn't feel like nothing. Her whole body was telling a story her mouth refused to narrate. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the man who had inserted himself into the middle of our lives. How he stared at Ivy like she was something he already owned. How she had started looking at him like she belonged. I needed answers. Real ones. No more assumptions. No more pretending. Because I was tired of guessing what my own wife was thinking. Tired of feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. And more than anything, I was tired of watching the woman I loved slowly disappear behind polite excuses and unreadable texts. So I made a decision. The next time she said she had to stay late with Sterling, I wasn't going to stay home and wait. I was going to find out the truth myself. It was a Wednesday. A slow, gray-skied evening that didn't promise much. Ivy had texted around 6 p.m. that she'd be working late again. "Sterling needs me to prep documents for a client pitch," she wrote. "Might be home around 10. Don't wait up." I stared at the message for a long time. Not because I didn't believe her, but because, deep down, I knew I did. And that was the problem. She wasn't lying anymore. Not really. She was choosing someone else's urgency over my presence, and that kind of shift speaks volumes without a single word. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I picked up my keys and left. I didn't have a plan, just instinct, a gut feeling that had grown too loud to ignore. Voss International sat like a glass sentinel in the center of downtown, its 30 stories gleaming even under the tired drizzle of a March evening. I parked a block away, out of habit more than necessity, and walked through the light mist with my collar turned up. The lobby guard barely glanced at me. I knew enough about Ivy's schedule to know she'd be on the 22nd floor. I'd visited her office once before, During a surprise lunch drop-off back when surprises still made her smile. Back when she wasn't hiding parts of her life behind passwords and polite distance. The elevator ride was slow. My reflection stared back at me from the mirror-polished walls, eyes tired, jaw clenched, like a man walking toward a truth he didn't want to find but couldn't ignore anymore. When the doors opened, I stepped into silence. The floor was mostly dark, save for a few scattered lights. A cleaning cart was parked near the break room. The hum of climate control was the only sound. I moved quietly, like I didn't belong, and in many ways, I didn't. Not in her world. Not anymore. I reached the hallway leading to her department and saw it. The light was on in her glass-walled office. And they were there. Sterling stood too close. That was the first thing I noticed. His hand was on Ivy's shoulder, light but familiar. Possessive. His head was tilted toward her, speaking low into her ear. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't smiling. But she wasn't moving either. She sat there, frozen like a statue built out of guilt and obligation. I should have walked away. I should have knocked. I should have done anything else. But my feet carried me forward, fast, hot blood pounding in my ears. I shoved the door open. They both jerked toward me. Ivy, I said, voice louder than I meant it. What the hell is this? Sterling straightened, immediately slipping into his CEO armor, composed, smooth. Mr. Rhodes, he said with faux politeness. I assume this is unexpected? Ivy stood, pale and stunned. Carter, what are you doing here? What am I doing here? I snapped. What are you doing here? With him. At 9:30 at night. While you ignore my calls and feed me vague texts. Sterling chuckled. She works for me. Late hours come with the job. I turned on him. My hands tightening into fists I had to consciously unclench. She doesn't work for you after hours. She's my wife. He tilted his head. And I'm sure she's excellent at both roles. It was a small sentence, but it cracked the air open like thunder. Ivy winced, her face crumpling for a second before smoothing out again. Stop, she said softly. Sterling, that's enough. Oh, now it's enough? I said, rounding on her. You let him talk to you like that? Thought you like that. She looked at me, and I'll never forget the expression on her face. Not anger, not even guilt. Just weariness. Like a woman who'd been standing in a storm for too long without a coat. I didn't want this, she whispered. Then why are you still here? Silence answered me first. Then Sterling stepped forward. This is clearly a domestic matter, he said, straightening his cufflinks. But I'd appreciate it if you didn't barge into my office again. I wanted to hit him. God, I wanted to hit him. But I looked at Ivy, really looked, and realized something that hurt more than anything else. She wasn't shocked by my presence. She was prepared for it. This wasn't new. I turned and left. I didn't wait for her to follow, didn't ask if she'd come home. I walked back through that cold, echoing hallway and took the elevator down, one agonizing second at a time. Outside, the rain had picked up. I didn't bother with my hood. I let it soak into my shirt, into my skin, like it could wash away the weight pressing down on me. I climbed into the car and sat there, hands on the steering wheel, watching the lights blur through the water on the windshield. I hadn't caught them in bed. I hadn't seen a kiss. But betrayal doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes, it arrives in silence. Sometimes, it just looks you in the eye and doesn't say a damn word. I never wanted to be that husband. The kind who checks phones, scrolls through texts, digs through digital shadows looking for proof that their life is a lie. But that's exactly who I became, and the truth is, it didn't feel like a choice. It felt like survival. The morning after I saw Ivy and Sterling through the glass, I barely slept. I lay in bed, watching the light shift on the ceiling, the silence between us louder than it had ever been. She had come home past midnight, slipped into bed without saying a word. She didn't touch me, didn't even try, and I didn't ask. At 6:42 a.m., her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Once, twice, then again. She didn't stir. I stared at it like it was a snake hissing in our bedroom, daring me to reach for it. Ivy never used to put a passcode on her phone. That changed 2 months ago. But I'd seen her unlock it enough times to know the sequence by muscle memory, 7272. Our old apartment number. Back when everything was simple. I didn't think. I just acted. The screen lit up. Messages. Dozens. All from one name. Sterling V. I opened the thread, and the first thing I saw made my stomach tighten. You look breathtaking in that blue dress. Another, sent a few nights earlier. Still thinking about you. A week before that. Let me take you away from all this. Not a single outright confession. No lewd images or explicit language. But it was all there, in the tone, the frequency, the familiarity. His messages read like the early stages of seduction, dipped in charm and cloaked in professionalism. They were crafted to blur lines, to soften boundaries until nothing felt inappropriate anymore. And then there were her replies. Not flirty, not eager, but not firm rejections either. One read, "Please stop messaging me after hours. Let's keep it professional." Another, "This can't happen." But one stuck out most. "I really can't do this." Can't do what? It wasn't what she said. It was what she didn't. No threats to report him. No anger. Just caution. Fear. Maybe guilt. I scrolled back months. Sterling initiated almost every message. A steady drip of control disguised as attention. It had escalated slowly, methodically. Like he knew she wouldn't slam the door, so he just kept pushing it open an inch at a time. And Ivy. She didn't let him in, not fully. But she didn't shut the door either. I heard the water turn off in the bathroom. My breath caught. Ivy stepped out wrapped in a towel, her hair damp, her skin still misted with steam. She froze when she saw me sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone glowing in my hand. Her eyes dropped to it. Then to me. "Carter," she said quietly. "Tell me I'm wrong," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Please. Tell me I'm reading this wrong." She didn't. She just wrapped the towel tighter around herself and sat on the edge of the dresser stool, not meeting my gaze. "He's been texting you for months," I said. "You didn't think to tell me?" "I didn't want to make things worse," she said. "It wasn't what it looks like." "Then what is it, Ivy?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you let him treat you like an option. And you protected him, not me." Her shoulders sank, and for the first time, I saw it. Shame, yes. But more than that, I saw fear. If I pushed back too hard, she whispered, he could ruin me. "Carter, do you understand that? He could kill my career with a word." I kept it quiet because I thought I could manage it, but he kept pushing, and I didn't want to lose everything I worked for. I stared at her, that fragile image of the woman I married cracking in my mind. "You didn't want to lose your career," I said slowly. "But you risked losing me?" Her lip trembled. "I didn't think it would go this far. I thought I had control." "No," I said, standing. "He had control, and you let him have it." I walked to the door, needing air, space, anything but this room heavy with betrayal. She called after me, but I didn't turn back. I stepped outside and let the morning hit me, cold, sharp, real. There's a unique kind of heartbreak that comes not from cheating, but from choosing silence over truth. From realizing the person you love would rather protect a monster than be honest with you. I didn't know what would happen next, if we could come back from this, if I even wanted to. But I knew one thing. I was done being the only one fighting for this marriage. I don't remember sitting down. I just remember the pounding in my chest and the sound of my own breathing echoing in my ears. My hands were clenched so tight they shook. Ivy sat across from me at the dining table, her arms folded like a shield, her eyes red but dry now. We'd been arguing for nearly an hour. Her voice had gone hoarse. Mine had gone cold. "You should have told me, Ivy. From the first message. From the first time he crossed the line. I didn't want you to lose it," she said quietly. "You don't understand the power that man has. If I'd gone to HR, they would have buried it. If I pushed too hard, he would have turned on me. And you were just going to let him. What? Keep testing the line while you tried to keep everything from falling apart." I was trying to survive, Carter. I stared at her. I believed her. That was the worst part. I believed every word. But I also couldn't shake the image of Sterling's hand on her shoulder, the messages laced with suggestion, the silence that had festered between us like a wound left untreated. "I would have protected you," I said. "All you had to do was tell me." "I was protecting you," she snapped. "From doing something reckless. From becoming the kind of man who loses everything over someone like him." But it was too late for that. Reckless had already taken root. That night, when the house had gone quiet and Ivy finally retreated upstairs, I didn't follow. I sat in the dark living room, staring at the fireplace we hadn't used since Christmas, thinking about all the moments I'd dismissed, the new perfume, the turned-over phone, the sudden excuses. They weren't just signs of guilt. They were signs of fear. She had been cornered, emotionally pinned between ambition and self-preservation. But still, she had kept me in the dark. And that betrayal had weight. Around 11:15, I stood, grabbed my coat, and walked out the door without a word. The night air was thick and biting, but I didn't feel it. I wasn't sure where I was going until I was already halfway there. Sterling's building was as sleek and sterile as the man himself. A glass monolith in a part of the city where people didn't walk, they were driven. I parked down the street, far enough to not draw attention, and waited. At 12:03 a.m., he emerged. He was alone. No driver tonight. Just him. A long, dark coat, leather gloves, and that same arrogant posture. He strolled toward his Jaguar like a man without consequences. I stepped out of the shadows before he could open the door. He paused, recognizing me immediately. A smug smile curled at the edge of his mouth. "Well," he said, "if it isn't the concerned husband. Late night walk, or are you here to cry some more?" My jaw locked. I took 2 steps closer. "She told me everything," I said, voice steady but hard. "The messages, the pressure, the way you made her feel like she couldn't say no." He raised an eyebrow. "Everything? I doubt that. She never really said no, did she?" I saw red. I didn't think. I moved. My fist connected with his jaw before he finished that smug sentence. He staggered back against the car, stunned more than hurt. But I wasn't done. He tried to recover, throwing a wild punch. I ducked and drove my shoulder into his chest, slamming him against the car door. He grunted, gasping for air. The parking lot lights caught the flash of panic in his eyes. "You don't get to treat people like tools," I growled. "You don't get to tear into my marriage and walk away without blood on your hands." He swung again. This time he connected, a glancing blow that cut my lip. But pain didn't matter. All I saw was Ivy, tired, afraid, holding everything in just to survive. I hit him again. Harder. He crumpled, coughing, trying to speak, but I grabbed the collar of his coat and pulled him close. "You think power protects you. But there's always a reckoning, Sterling. And sometimes it comes without a lawsuit or a scandal. Sometimes it just shows up in a parking lot." I let him drop. He lay there, groaning, holding his side. Maybe a cracked rib. Definitely a bruised ego. I stood over him, fist throbbing, chest heaving. And for the first time in weeks, I felt clear. "You come near my wife again," I said, "and I won't stop next time." I turned and walked away, blood on my knuckles, my heartbeat hammering like war drums in my chest. I didn't know what this meant for me and Ivy. I didn't know if I just destroyed everything or defended what little we had left. But I knew this. Men like Sterling think they can take whatever they want. They thrive on fear and silence. And that night, I stopped being silent. The sound of sirens wasn't something I expected to hear the next morning. I was in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee I hadn't touched, staring at the doorway where Ivy had stood just minutes earlier, her eyes swollen from the night's silence. She hadn't said much since I walked back in. She didn't ask where I'd been, but she knew. Her silence confirmed it. I think part of her had expected it all along. I think part of me had too. I heard the knock a few seconds before the flash of blue and red spilled across our living room walls. 2 officers stood on the front step, clean-cut, expressionless, the way cops always look when they know they're about to inconvenience someone who thinks they're safe. "Carter Rhodes," one of them asked. I nodded. "You're under arrest for assault. We need you to come with us." The words hit me like a punch to the ribs. I didn't fight it. I didn't even ask how Sterling had managed it so fast. I just held out my wrists and let the cold steel slide over my skin. Behind me, Ivy gasped. "Wait, what? What are you talking about?" "Mr. Sterling Voss has pressed charges," one of the officers said. "There's surveillance footage. He claims Mr. Rhodes attacked him without provocation." Ivy's voice cracked. "That's not what happened. He's lying." But they weren't there to argue. They were there to follow protocol. I was walked out in front of my neighbors, shoved into the back of a squad car like I was a criminal. Maybe I was. Maybe I'd finally become the kind of man she feared I'd turn into: violent, reckless, consumed. The holding cell smelled like sweat and resignation. I sat on the bench, hands on my knees, staring at the dirty wall in front of me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel angry. I felt hollow, like I'd finally poured every last ounce of myself into the fire, and all that was left was smoke. They let me call Ivy. She answered on the second ring. "Carter," she whispered. Her voice was shaky. "I'm so sorry. Did you get a lawyer?" I asked. "Yes. Her name's Harper Quinn. She's good." I told her everything. I hung on that. Everything. It meant she'd finally stopped protecting Sterling. Finally decided to stand beside me. "She's already requested the security footage from the garage," Ivy continued. "She said Sterling's version won't hold up if they see the whole thing." "Let's hope so," I muttered. "I'm not built for Prison Orange." Ivy gave a wet, shaky laugh. Then silence. "I'll be there," she said. When she showed up that afternoon with Harper Quinn, I barely recognized her. Ivy looked like a woman who had finally chosen to fight back. Her eyes were swollen but steady, and she clutched a folder of documents like a weapon. Harper was brisk and all business, late 30s, sharp blazer, sharper tongue. "I've reviewed the footage," she said, without so much as a hello. Sterling did, in fact, throw the first punch. Your response, though aggressive, could be argued as self-defense. The moment he struck you, your retaliation became legally justifiable. I stared at her. "So, I'm not going to jail." "Not likely," she said. "He's already facing internal investigations." Your wife's testimony, along with these messages, she held up a printed thread of texts, paints a very different picture than the one he tried to spin. He overplayed his hand. I let out a slow breath. The cuffs were gone now, but the cold lingered around my wrists. I looked at Ivy. She looked back. When they released me, we walked to the car in silence. She drove. Neither of us spoke until we pulled into the driveway. The same driveway I'd left the night before as one version of a husband and returned today as something else entirely. "I quit," she said, breaking the silence. "I walked into Voss International this morning, handed in my resignation, and told HR everything." I turned to her. "Everything?" She nodded. "I didn't just leave the job. I left him. For good." Tears welled in her eyes again. She looked exhausted. But underneath it all, I saw the woman I fell in love with. Strong, decisive, human. "I'm sorry, Carter," she whispered. "For lying. For being scared. For not telling you when I should have." I nodded, jaw tight. "And I'm sorry for not being someone you felt safe telling." We sat there a while longer, the engine off, the windows fogging around us. Neither of us knew what came next. Our names would ripple through office gossip. We'd become cautionary tales whispered in break rooms and boardrooms. But right then, it didn't matter. She reached for my hand, and I let her take it. There's a moment after the storm, when everything is still, not because the world is healed, but because it's stunned. That's how it felt, sitting beside Ivy on the couch 3 nights after my arrest, our hands folded in our laps like strangers at a bus stop. We were finally out of the eye of it. Sterling's name was on every business blog, a headline cautioning executives on the danger of unchecked power. Voss International released a statement about internal restructuring, and just like that, the man who thought he was untouchable had become a liability. But even with the noise fading, something inside our home hadn't returned. Ivy and I moved like we were learning each other again. Carefully, hesitantly. We'd talk about groceries, about bills, about surface things. But the deep conversations, the raw ones, were still buried under weeks of tension and years of unspoken truths. Our marriage hadn't broken in a day. It had cracked slowly, one withheld thought at a time. It was Ivy who suggested therapy. She stood in the doorway of my home office, clutching a paper with a few names scribbled on it, and said, "I think we need help. Not just you and me, separately too. I want to talk to someone." I looked at the names. 2 were couples counselors. 1 was a trauma specialist. It hit me then. This wasn't just about betrayal. Ivy had been living in fear. And not just fear of Sterling, but fear of being doubted, of not being believed, of being dismissed. That fear had kept her quiet, and that silence had cost us everything. I agreed, not out of obligation, but because I didn't want to keep rebuilding this house of ours on a cracked foundation. My therapist's name was Corinne, a former combat counselor who traded in military bases for private practice. She didn't coddle. She asked pointed questions, the kind that cut through surface-level frustration and went straight for the roots. "Why did you punch him?" she asked in our first session. I hesitated. "Because he deserved it." She nodded. "Fair. But why you? Why not your wife? Why did it become your fight?" I swallowed. "Because I felt powerless. And men like him thrive on that. On control. I needed him to feel what he made us feel." Corinne leaned forward. "That's not rage, Carter. That's grief." I didn't understand it at first. But the more I sat with it, the more it made sense. I hadn't just been angry at Sterling. I'd been mourning the life I thought I had. Mourning the ease, the trust, the comfort of knowing the person beside you had nothing to hide. And that grief had morphed into fists. Ivy started seeing someone too. A woman named Elise who specialized in workplace abuse. Ivy came home one night after a session and cried in the doorway. I wrapped her in my arms as she sobbed. Not because I had the right words, but because sometimes just being there was enough. We started talking more. Not the old surface-level talk. Real things. She told me about the nights she felt trapped in her office, Sterling's voice behind her as she typed, pretending nothing was wrong. She told me about how every time she tried to set a boundary, he'd twist it into a compliment, a challenge. She told me she started dreading her own ambition. I shared things I didn't even know I'd been holding. How I'd watched her drift away in real time, pretending not to notice. How helpless I felt every time she chose her job over me, over us. How ashamed I was for going through her phone. But how betrayed I felt when what I found confirmed every fear I tried to swallow. She listened. I listened. That became our ritual. Not perfect conversations, but honest ones. Ivy also joined a nonprofit called Rise Above, a support network for survivors of professional coercion. She started volunteering on the weekends, helping other women find their voices before silence became their prison. One evening, she came home buzzing with energy, her eyes clearer than I'd seen in months. "I met a woman today," she said, pulling off her coat. She'd worked for her boss for 7 years. He manipulated her into thinking no one else would ever hire her. Today, she walked into that meeting room, looked him in the eye, and quit. I smiled. "Sounds like someone I know." She smiled back, genuine this time. And for a moment, we were us again. I started attending anger management. Not because I felt out of control, but because I needed to understand why I'd snapped. That's where I met Marco, a quiet man with eyes that looked 10 years older than his face. He'd lost his wife to suicide. Her manager had pushed her for years, belittled her daily, all behind a closed door and a charming public face. Marco hadn't known until it was too late. We talked often. About silence. About how men aren't taught how to sit in discomfort without turning it into violence. About what happens when you ignore your instincts for the sake of keeping peace. A counselor there named Sadie said something that stuck with me. Silence isn't peace. It's slow erosion. That line lived in my chest like a mantra. Silence had cost us trust. Silence had allowed a predator to walk through our lives unchecked. Silence had nearly broken us. But we weren't silent anymore. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind that used to pass without notice, back when life was too busy to feel the stillness. Ivy and I had finished folding laundry and were just sitting side by side on the couch when a knock came at the door. It was our goddaughter, Tess. 5 years old, firecracker spirit, and endlessly curious. Her mother had dropped her off for an hour while she ran errands. Tess ran in like she owned the place, dragging her backpack behind her and a pack of crayons clutched in one hand like it was a baton in a race. "Can I draw?" she asked, already spreading paper across the coffee table. "Of course," Ivy said, brushing Tess's curls gently. "Use as many as you want." We watched her for a while, her tiny fingers gripping colors, tongue poking out in concentration as she brought her little masterpiece to life. The sound of her humming filled the space, innocent and soft, and I felt something stir in my chest. A kind of ache, but not the painful kind. The kind that makes room, that expands quietly, patiently. 15 minutes later, Tess held up her drawing with pride. "Look, it's you and Auntie Ivy and 2 kids and a dog. That's your family." For later, Ivy took the picture from her gently, eyes scanning the stick figures, one tall with brown hair, one with a long purple dress. 2 smaller ones, a boy and a girl, holding a leash attached to a floppy-eared dog. Above them, a yellow sun beamed wide, and in the corner, written in wobbly letters, "A happy family." I watched Ivy stare at it for a long time. Then she looked at me and asked the question I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for. "Do you think we're ready?" There was no hesitation in me, no pause. I didn't even need to know exactly what she meant, because I did. It wasn't just about children. It was about healing, about reclaiming our future after nearly losing it. "Yes," I said, and my voice cracked, just slightly. "I do." We sat there in silence, holding Tess's drawing like it was a blueprint for something we had once dared to imagine and were now brave enough to build. That week, we painted the guest room. Soft mint green with cream trim. The color Ivy had bookmarked in her phone almost 2 years ago. She'd forgotten about it, but I hadn't. As we taped the corners and rolled the paint onto the walls, we laughed. Real laughter. It echoed off the plaster, off the wood floor, off the quiet places in our hearts we'd tried so hard to protect. At one point, Ivy stopped mid-stroke and looked over at me. Her shirt was speckled with green, and her hair was a mess. "You know," she said, "I always imagined this moment would come after everything was perfect." I wiped a streak of paint off her cheek with my thumb. Maybe it only comes after everything isn't. We booked a doctor's appointment the next day, not because we had a timeline, but because we wanted to be prepared. It felt like finally standing in the same chapter again, after too many months reading different books in the same house. Our evening shifted. We started making time, not finding it, not hoping for it. We'd put our phones in a drawer during dinner, take walks after the dishes were clean. We had become more intentional, more present. Sometimes we'd lie on the couch, feet tangled together, just reading in the same room. Other times we'd talk about the past, not to dwell, but to understand. Ivy shared more about the nonprofit, Rise Above, how one of the women she mentored had finally reported her boss and was now rebuilding her life in a different state. She told me she never thought anyone would believe her, Ivy said, until she saw someone else survive it. That someone was you, I said, meaning it. I watched pride rise in her cheeks, warm and quiet, the kind that doesn't need applause. Ivy was no longer surviving. She was shaping something, leaving marks in the world that were hers, not because of what she'd endured, but because of how she chose to rise. One night, I found the crayon drawing in a frame on her desk. I hadn't seen her place it there, but she had, and it stayed. Weeks passed, then a month. We didn't talk about timelines. We just kept building little routines, tiny hopes, second chances layered like bricks in something sturdy. I remember waking up early one morning and hearing her in the bathroom, the sound of the test wrapper crinkling, the soft breath she took before reading it. I waited, heart pounding, listening. Then I heard her cry, not broken or afraid, but overwhelmed. She stepped into the bedroom, holding the test. 2 lines. I sat up slowly, and she stood there, wordless, her eyes glistening. "We're having a baby," she whispered. My hands covered my face. My body shook, not from fear, from relief, from joy, from disbelief that after everything we'd been through, this was real. We didn't need fireworks. We didn't need an announcement. We had each other. And now we had something more. A crayon future. One we were finally ready for. The first time I held Mira in my arms, the world narrowed into something quiet and complete. She was impossibly small, a bundle of soft skin, dark curls, and the tiniest hands I'd ever seen. I looked down at her, wrapped in a floral hospital blanket, and felt everything I'd ever doubted unravel in a single breath. Ivy was beside me in the hospital bed, her face tired but glowing in that way only new mothers can. She smiled at me. Slow, exhausted, but full of something pure. We named her Mira Eloan Rhodes. Mira, because it meant wonder. Eloan, because Ivy had always loved that name, long before we'd ever dared to dream of this moment. When we brought her home 2 days later, the house felt different. Not just quieter or more careful, but alive. Like every wall, every window, every thread of carpet had been holding its breath and could now exhale. We'd moved 2 months before she was born, packed up the old house, the one where too many ghosts lingered. Our new place was smaller, tucked into a quieter neighborhood just outside the city. Ivy had picked it for the sunlight, every room bathed in warmth by noon. Like the house itself refused to let darkness stay too long. I launched my own tech firm, something I'd been quietly building during our recovery. Nothing flashy, just honest, thoughtful work. A team of 5. Software for nonprofits and healthcare organizations. It was slower paced, but it felt like mine. Ivy didn't go back to the corporate world. She didn't want to. She built out Rise Above with the fire of a woman who'd once been silenced and now had something to say. She started speaking at panels, led workshops. One day she came home with tears in her eyes after helping a young woman leave a job where her supervisor had been manipulating her emotionally. She told me she didn't even know what boundaries looked like until we talked. Ivy said. I just held her hand. That was her fight now, using her pain to pave someone else's escape. Our days blurred into feedings, naps, and baby giggles that cracked me open in ways I didn't know I needed. Mira loved the porch. Ivy and I would sit out there, like we once dreamed of. Only now, instead of wine or plans for Paris, we had a baby monitor, warm tea, and soft lullabies drifting from the open windows. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted everything in gold, Ivy rested her head on my shoulder. Mira was asleep in her bassinet beside us, her tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that felt like the heartbeat of something bigger. We made it, I whispered. Ivy smiled, her hand wrapping around mine. No, love, we chose to make it. That sentence echoed through me like gospel. Because she was right. Us, wasn't luck. It wasn't fate. It was work. It was choosing each other again and again when it would have been easier to let go. It was sitting through the hard talks, the therapy sessions, the long silences, and still reaching across the bed at night. It was choosing love not because it was perfect, but because it was worth it. We heard about Sterling months later. Some podcast featured his downfall in an episode called The Titan Who Fell. He had been sued twice. His reputation was shattered, his name no longer a currency, but a cautionary tale. Ivy listened to the episode once, then deleted it. I don't need to hear how he fell, she said. I already know what standing back up feels like. I never looked him up again. We weren't his victims anymore. We were a family. And that was the legacy I wanted Mira to grow up in, not one shaped by trauma, but one born from resilience. Some nights I still think about the man I was, angry, confused, desperate to feel seen. I don't blame him. He was doing the best he could with what he knew. But I've learned that real strength doesn't come from the punch you throw or the anger you unleash. It comes from staying, from healing, from forgiving, even when it doesn't come easy. We hung Tessa's crayon drawing in Myra's nursery. It's framed now, tucked above the rocking chair. The sun she drew shines down on us still. 2 tall figures. 2 small ones. A dog we haven't adopted yet, but probably will. And whenever I rock Mira to sleep, I look at that drawing and remember, we didn't just survive the storm. We became the sunlight that followed.